Welcome to this AG panel. It is, as most of you know, which is why you're here, it matters who is in offices. It matters because they determine the policies that affect our lives in real kinds of ways. So we're lucky here in that we have anybody who says the Democratic Party doesn't have a deep bench. Ta-da! And so we're honored to have such wonderful candidates running for AG. The purpose of this panel is for you all to get to know them better, their policies. It is not a gotcha attack type forum. This is a forum where there are going to be questions from the audience. You should see cards going around, or there may be cards on your table. Please write any questions on those cards and they'll be collected. So we want that audience participation. They will be curated because we get double questions, triple questions, those kinds of things. But we will start off. There has been a little bit of change in the time frame because we added a candidate last night. That's what I do on Fridays, is call candidates and talk with people. So we are going to be we're going to adjust that. So what I'd like to start off with is each candidate introduces themselves. They know themselves better than I do. Though I'd like to think I know at least two of them very well, and I'm looking forward to getting to know the others. So we're going to start off with a 3-minute introduction opening statement. We do have a timekeeper, and so we'll go from there, and then we're going to have 2-minute questions. I sent the candidates a list of pool of possible questions, and we will start asking for them. I love the fact that there's so many people in the audience and there's so many people online. This is what democracy is about. Showing up, caring about who we elect. So if I'm, kind of relaxed, and if nobody cares, we'll just start here with Karen and move on down with your opening statements.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen McDonald. I am the current Oakland County prosecutor. I am a former circuit court judge, a former private practice lawyer, have spent years in the courtroom, are fighting for people who needed protection and help. And before that, I went to law school. I was a public school teacher. I have grown up in a household and a family that was the working class. And I am running for Attorney General because I believe our party needs to address the issues that people really care about across the state. And that is, how are they going to pay their bills? How are they going to have access to medical care? Who's going to look out for them as consumers? Who's going to stand up for them when we have large corporations and data centers being built in their communities? And the Attorney General is the people's lawyer. And that's what I've done my whole career, both as a teacher and a lawyer, as a judge. As a mom, I have fought and protected kids and families and people who couldn't fight for themselves. And right now, I'm sure all of us are going to tell you that we need a very passionate and strong leader who's going to stand up to Trump and stand up to the White House, because we are seeing things we've never seen before and chipping away at our basic civil rights and our democracy, which is essentially going to hurt people, real people who need our help and protection. And that's what the Democratic Party has always been about. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I want my party to stand for everyday people regardless of the color of your skin or who you worship or how much money you have or whether you're from the working class or you're from any community, or regardless of who you love or how you identify. It's what I've been doing my whole life, and that's what I'm doing now, and I'll continue to do that as the next AG. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Ready for me?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Bill Noakes, and before I talk about myself, which is often off-putting, I'd like to thank the Michigan College Dems for being here. It's one of those things where it's great to see young people involved, because people like myself, we will soon leave the scene, and we need you behind us. So, about myself. Again, my name is Bill Noakes. I've been a practicing attorney for going on 44 years now, and I'm not your typical attorney. I've had a variety of jobs. I started out as a judge advocate in the United States Air Force for 5 years, and at one point I was the legal advisor to the commander of a cruise missile base. I've been with General Motors as an attorney with their legal staff. I was with the Securities and Exchange Commission back in the 80s, where I chased insider traders. Since that time, I've been a partner in 2 different law firms. I've been a prosecutor. Even though I'm a public defender, I'll have to say I was a prosecutor at one time. I was associate independent counsel in the prosecution of the Secretary of Agriculture of the United States for corruption. I've been the chief legal officer of the Meyer Corporation. And for the last 7 years, I've been a public defender. And people look at me and say, why would you do that? Well, one day I was sitting in the courtroom of a judge. We were about to have lunch, and I simply did not like the way I saw a young black man being represented in that court, where he faced the potential of going to prison for the rest of his life. And so that day, I went over to the public defender's office and talked to the chief public defender and said, you know what? I think you can use some help. I don't think your staff is as good as it should be. And I volunteered to join the staff, and I've been with the public defender's office ever since then. In my career, I've tried more than 400 cases, and I've lost about 12. I play to win all of the time. Now, while I don't go looking for a fight, I don't run from one either. And if I'm elected as your Attorney General, Mr. Trump and his minions will certainly be in for a fight.
Well, hello, everybody. I am Ellie Savit. I am the Washtenaw County Prosecuting Attorney, and I know most of you here. Thank you so much to the Washtenaw Dems for putting on this forum, and I echo the shout out to the College Dems for all the great work that they are doing and their organizing efforts. So just a little bit about myself. As I think probably everybody in here knows, I am currently the Washtenaw County Prosecutor. Before that, I worked for the city of Detroit, led our public interest work, among other things. That meant suing the opioid industry, holding them accountable for the damages that they have caused in perpetuating the opioid epidemics in our communities. Led the city's efforts in the right to literacy lawsuit, which successfully challenged the Betsy DeVos-inspired policies that had decimated the Detroit public schools and got nearly $100 million back into the Detroit schools as a result of that. I've been a practicing environmental lawyer, suing corporate polluters like Shell and DuPont and Chemours and Exxon for PFAS contamination and other contamination of our air and water. And this is the background that I hope to bring to the Attorney General's office. Because right now, we are at a crossroads. The Trump administration is set on decimating our civil rights protections, our environmental protections, our worker and consumer protections, and we need an Attorney General who is going to fight back against all of that in federal court. But we also need an Attorney General who is going to serve as the backstop and enforce our state level civil rights laws and environmental laws and worker and consumer protection laws. And that is work that I have done throughout my entire career. We have to be honest about this. I wish I could say that there was a silver bullet and, we could stop the Trump administration and win cases. But we have a horrible Supreme Court right now, as we just talked about. And it's important that we have a state attorney general, not just who is going to take the fight to Trump, which, make no mistake about it, I will do, but is going to serve as the backstop here in Michigan to make sure that everybody is protected, to make sure that our environment is protected, to make sure that consumers aren't getting screwed over by predatory corporations, to make sure that workers are paid what they are owed and are not subject to wage theft, and to make sure that these attacks on our civil rights, the attempts to use our civil rights laws, not to enforce equality, but to reestablish a system in which people that look like me get an advantage, to make sure that that never takes root here in Michigan. That is why I'm running for Attorney General. That is the work that I've done throughout my career, and I look forward to the conversation here today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Totten. I think we're all here today because we all know that we are living in a dangerous and unprecedented moment in modern American history. And the conversation about who is our next attorney general and what their priorities are going to be is incredibly important because the state AG is on the very front lines in every state that's fighting right now across the United States. So thank you all for being part of this really important conversation. I was born and raised in Kalamazoo. My mom was a first grade teacher, MEA member for 30 years, single parent. My dad was a long distance truck driver. My wife is an attorney as well. She worked for many years for the ACLU, Kristen did, running their flood water litigation on behalf of kids with disabilities. Got a daughter who's a freshman at U of M, and my son's a junior in high school. I've held a lot of jobs as a lawyer. I started out at the U.S. Department of Justice in D.C. I served at MSU for several years where I was teaching criminal law and thinking a lot about what a state that really wanted to lean in and hold corporations accountable could do. And then in late 2018, when Governor Whitmer was elected, she asked me if I'd serve as her chief legal counsel. I was with her for almost her first 4 years. It was an amazing experience, right? We've got a global pandemic that was on nobody's bingo card. We've got militia members trying to kidnap and kill the governor. I want to tell you about one thing I was particularly proud of. On March 17th of 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court put out a little notice saying it was going to hear a case called the Dobbs case. And I knew where that might go, right? I knew that this Supreme Court might do something that I have never seen the modern Supreme Court do, which is to take away a constitutional right. And so starting that day, I put together the legal team. I crafted the legal strategy. You all saw the fruits of that effort. The governor was the first in the nation to proactively file a lawsuit that protected reproductive rights all across the state of Michigan until the people put those rights in our state constitution. I ended up stepping down in 2022 because President Biden nominated me to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan, the chief federal law enforcement officer across 49 counties, all of the Upper Peninsula and then the western half of the Lower Peninsula. I had the privilege every single day to protect children from predators, to protect seniors from fraudsters, to protect vulnerable communities from civil rights violations. I prosecuted multiple white supremacists that committed hate crimes across the district, and also to hold corrupt politicians accountable, including the largest prosecution in state government in over 30 years against former Speaker of the House, Rick Johnson, for chairing the Michigan Medical Marijuana Board and pulling in bribes hand over fist. I stepped down on Inauguration Day, took a few months to try to figure out what's next. As you can imagine, my number one priority, if I am privileged to be the next Attorney General, is to stop the president. My second priority is to try to fill the gaps that have been left by the fact that in so many key areas, federal law enforcement, the kind of work I've been doing for the last 3 years across Michigan, has just laid down its sword. That certainly means protecting workers. It means protecting civil rights when the U.S. Department of Justice has become weaponized against the very people it is supposed to protect. It means holding corporations accountable when the federal government has walked away and given them a pass. It means protecting the environment as well, and I look forward to talking about those this morning.
So thank you all. We've gotten, I hope, a chance to know you all a little better. We are going to go to the questions, prepared questions, and we will have 2 minutes and for you to answer. And we'll start with Mark this time. So the first question, which is for everybody, is what are your enforcement priorities given the limits of what an estate attorney general can do?
It's a great question, Kathy. Thanks for that. I'm just going to pick up with where I just ended up since I'm next. So let me talk about those three things. There are a number of important areas that the AG, our next AG, has to be focused on. But given that I have 2 minutes, I'll talk about three. We need to be focused on protecting workers, right? You all saw what the president did to the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, incredible agency tasked with protecting workers all across the state, all across the United States. Illegally fired a Democratic member. They can't meet for 4 years because they don't have a quorum. Now, as AG, I can't step in and just replace all of that. But protecting workers and enforcing state laws against wage theft, against worker misclassification, against our health and safety rules, against anti-retaliation provisions, all that kind of work is incredibly important right now. I also think about work around civil rights. I mean, you heard me just say the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, which I worked so closely with just 10 months ago, has been weaponized against the very people it is supposed to protect. But the good news is we have a strong state civil rights law, thanks to people like Senator Jeff Irwin and probably other legislators who in 2023 amended it. It's one of the strongest in the nations. It will give me all of the power that I need to be able to stand up and to protect civil rights at this dangerous moment. And then lastly, I think about holding corporations accountable. You know, the president has just walked away from this kind of work. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has returned $21 billion to cheated consumers over the last 11 years, is all but dead. And so stepping in and holding corporations accountable, bringing lawsuits, teaming up with other states when they nickel and dime or worse consumers has to be a priority. Those are three things. There's other things that are important as well, but I'll mention those now. Thanks.
So 2 minutes is not nearly enough for this question. I'm going to talk fast. Number one, civil rights and voting rights. I agree actually with a lot of what Mark said, to see the federal government not just lay down a sword, but to try to weaponize anti-DEI measures to take the civil rights and the voting rights away from Black people, away from communities of color, away from the very people who those rights are supposed to protect is abhorrent. The Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act is a great tool. I will enforce that as state AG. And this next AG is going to be the AG come 2028. When make no mistake about it, we expect challenges to voting rights in Michigan is tremendously important. Number two, I'll say consumer and worker protection. As folks in here know, we started in the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office, the only economic justice unit in the state of Michigan, which specifically focuses on things like wage theft, on things like consumer protection, on things like predatory slumlords, like one that may be down the street here. And thank you again to Annie Somerville and so many others for working on the Arbor One litigation with us. It is important to hold corporations accountable. People are struggling economically right now. The AG can't address all of that alone. But what we can do and what we must do is make sure that predatory corporations aren't jacking prices up higher than they should be, aren't stealing from their workers, and aren't taking advantage of low-income tenants, potentially refugees, folks in Section 8 housing, and that will be a priority as AG as well. Environmental protection. We have 90% of the nation's fresh water, and the next AG must protect the environment. I've been a practicing environmental lawyer. I know how to do it. And the last thing I will mention is artificial intelligence. We are careening into a brave new world without any sort of a thoughtful regulation on AI, on how it can be used to cheat people, on how it can be used to screw workers over. I'm sure we'll have the data centers conversation later. And we need regulations and we need laws around AI to make sure that it is not hurting real human beings. But the Attorney General can step in on an enforcement level, enforce our existing laws as they pertain to AI, and that is going to be something I'm laser focused on as well.
When I think about the position of AG, there's several things that come to mind in terms of enforcement. One of the issues that I've seen over the last 30 years is how companies will come into Michigan, or they will offer to expand their operations, and they say they will contribute a certain number of jobs into the community. And very rarely do they hit the mark, and nothing is done about it. It's important, if you make a promise to somebody, do it. Live up to it. Otherwise, don't make the promise, and don't take the state's money, the money of the people of this state. Second thing is environmental. And I look at it more granularly. I live in the city of Detroit, and one of the things that has bothered me for more than 25 years is when I would drive down I-75 and I look at the remains of the old Packard plant. Well, if that corporation shut down, they should have had an obligation to clean up what they left behind. Instead, it falls on the citizens of this state to do, and that's wrong. The last thing is, if you are going to be, in terms of just being real, keeping it real, as it were. There are citizens, there are people who worked for the city of Detroit, for example, for years and years and years. And the reconstruction of Detroit was built on their backs by taking from their retirement. I'd like to take a good hard look at the emergency manager law and what that has done, in particular in discriminating against cities that are largely Black. Flint, Detroit, Benton Harbor. Because if we are going to talk about fairness, we need to actually live fairness. Now, I'll leave you with this. Some people look at me and say, oh, he's an old guy, he's a boomer. But I was born into a segregated state. I was born in Washington, D.C. during segregation. And I still recall how my mother would say to me before we went downtown, please go to the bathroom before you go, because there will be no place for you to go downtown, or they will send you to a place that I don't want you to go to. I've seen things improve markedly since then, and I'd like to keep us on that moral arc of justice, because as Martin Luther King said, it bends towards justice, but not without our help.
The Attorney General is the highest ranking law enforcement official in the state. And that office, aside from these lawsuits, which we already talked about, is the highest enforcement official. Without an enforcement component, none of the laws that are there to protect us from all sorts of things really matter. I run the second largest prosecutor's office in the state, and I will focus on issues that have the greatest impact for the people of the state of Michigan and the things that they care about the most. First and foremost, public safety is important, and the Attorney General is responsible for that. So things like I've focused on already and created a trafficking unit in Oakland County. The Attorney General plays a huge role in human and labor trafficking. We're in the top 10 for the country. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death for kids in this country. And the Attorney General absolutely should, and I will, expand what we're doing on the prevention side, and instead of just focusing on the moment when someone has their hand on the gun. And the other thing that I talked about before, which is people are concerned, rightly so, about their ability to pay their bills, support their family, and have a meaningful life, regardless of what community you come from, what gender you are, what race you are, or whether or not you're college educated. My parents were not college educated, but they still had the ability to produce a very nice, hardworking life for us. The AG needs to protect consumers against utility rates. People are having a hard time paying their bills, paying utilities, paying their rent. The AG enforces fair housing authority and goes after landlords that are not treating residents and their tenants fairly. The AG protects you from the environmental. These are all things I'm going to focus on, because in communities where we have lower income, that is where you're seeing environmental violations that affect them the most. And issues that affect the working class, like wage theft and misclassification and lifting up our working class.
Thank you, everyone. I notice some of you are taking notes because those priorities that, they are laying out their priorities for you to determine who to vote for. So pay it, that's an important thing. And I commend everybody who's paying attention, and you are. The next question is a little bit, it's going to be pretty broad. I'm putting a number of things into one. I hate to do it, but I'm going to give you 3 minutes on this one. I'm trying to keep us in line so we get lots, of questions from everyone. But I think it's really, really important. So the Trump administration is involved in a deliberate, intentional, concerted attack on Black and brown people. And they are eliminating DEI, which really in reality is they want to go back to the DEI that favored white men in particular. There's issue anything that has the word equity in it, they are attacking. They are trying to eliminate our culture. If you are a brown person, whether you're Latino or Muslim or African American, brown skin, you can be scared to go to school, to take your kids to school, to go to the store. But there is this vicious attack, as I said, on Black and brown people. So how would your policies as a state attorney general respond to these attacks on Black people, brown people, equities, the civil rights, voting rights, and the attempts to eliminate the opportunity to have an equal education? Like I said, it's kind of a broad one. I rolled a number of things into once. So I will go next there. Ellie, would you like to start off?
Sure. And let me just say this. First and foremost, we need our state attorney general to be challenging each and every one of these policies, these executive orders coming out of the Trump administration, which trample on civil rights, trample on voting rights, and seek to undo any sort of progress that this country has made over the last 150 years. We need to call this anti-DEI stuff what it is. It is just dressed up racism. One thing that, for example, the Trump administration's education department is now doing, the decimated education department, which, by the way, now doesn't have enough resources to enforce special education laws. But what they're trying to do is review college admissions decisions to make sure that there's no illegal affirmative action going on there. What that means is that college admissions counselors are being basically threatened. And they know that if they let a Black person in over a white person, that's going to be scrutinized by the federal government. And this is intentional. It's an attempt to reestablish white supremacy, racism that we have seen over the last 100 plus years. And that is intentional, and we need to fight back against it. On a federal lawsuit level, I do think that state AGs have been doing a good job fighting back against Trump. I do think that there are instances in which they can do more. I think that there are certain cases in which state attorneys general, being the actors that can represent the entire people of the state, may be able to go into court when individuals are not. And I'll give you an example. The case that the United States Supreme Court basically out of Los Angeles, they basically upheld racial profiling in Los Angeles. And it's not entirely clear why they did it, but one reason may be an argument that nobody in that case had standing. Nobody in that case could establish that they were going to be subject of racial profiling. Well, a state AG can be damn sure that people in their state, when you've got these policies coming out of the federal government, are going to be subject to racial profiling. And so I think there are opportunities to get involved directly in litigation, even over and above what AGs have been doing currently, and I will do that. The second thing is, of course, enforcing our state level civil rights laws, because no matter what the Trump administration says, no matter what pressure they are putting on institutions to kowtow to their priorities, we still have civil rights laws in this state, and they prevent racial discrimination. And I want to be very clear on this. If you are engaged in racial discrimination as an institution in the state of Michigan because you fear the Trump administration, you've still got to answer to state civil rights law. You've still got to answer to the state attorney general, and I will enforce that as well. Voting rights was mentioned here, and I just want to say this has to be a tremendous concern, especially in light of several cases that are currently up in front of the United States Supreme Court, which are really threatening to gut the Federal Voting Rights Act. Okay, one more sentence. 3 minutes goes fast. One thing that we need to be advocating for is the Michigan Voting Rights Act, which I think passed the Senate, died in the House at the end of the lame duck session next year, to make sure that we have state level hooks to do it. I will use a bully pulpit to do that as well.
I'll take the first 5 seconds to clear. What I'd like to say to you is I'm concerned about what's happening with folks of color because I am one. And frankly, I've lived a life that has been interesting, but it's also resulted in me being profiled. I've been profiled by the state police and stopped by the state police because my car didn't seem appropriate for a Black man. I've been stopped by the police in the city of Detroit because, I was moving a little too fast down Jefferson Avenue. I was going 3 miles over the speed limit. I've seen it. So it's not simply a matter of dealing with the Trump administration and the federal government, but one of the things I'd like to see here is a more sensitive government, a more sensitive to the people here, because a large number of the folks here in Michigan are either Black or brown or yellow. In Southwest Detroit right now, as far as the Trump is concerned, that's open. It's open for them to raid anytime they want. And many of the people that I know in Southwest Detroit, their families have lived here for 60, 70, 80 years. Now, when I was living in Dallas a few years back, my Latino friends would joke and they'd say, well, we didn't move over the border. The border moved over us. And we have to recognize that fact, and we have to do something about it. I have no problem going after the Trump administration for violations of the Civil Rights Act. I have no problem going after folks inside of Michigan who feel free and open to denigrate folks of color. It's important that we recognize that we are all in this thing together. And as your Attorney General, I will be in it with you because I know the story. I know the history. And it's important that we know where we've been in order to know where we're going. And I want to make sure that life here is better for my sons, my 2 youngest sons who are 19 and 17, than it was for me. And so as AG, I will deploy all the forces of that office to make sure that we live a better life and that we do the things that we need to do. We need to make sure that we have clean water. We need to make sure that we have clean air. And we need to make sure that we have companies that want to come to Michigan to employ the excellent people that live here.
There's no question that the lawsuits that AGs are filing across the country, the Democratic AGs, are necessary and critical. I'll point out that recently our Attorney General joined in the filing of Massachusetts versus Doe, which was essentially a bullying technique to try to ban any federal loan forgiveness to anyone who basically even recognizes the existence of a transgender person, or bullying entities into providing no public camping, which is just an attempt to basically erase marginalized communities, homelessness. All of these things are shocking, and they're just abhorrent to all of us. And the lawsuits that our AG is joining in and starting are critical. Every single person up here must, and we have to nominate and elect somebody who will stand strong in those lawsuits. But I want to talk about the things that I'm doing right now. For instance, what's happening with ICE and Black and brown people literally being pulled over based on the color of their skin. That's happening outside schools. That's happening to parents who are dropping their kids off at school. And I recently just issued an advisory and support to all school districts to help in that regard. And with regard to our voting rights, free speech is one thing, but we hold people accountable and have charged people who come in and threaten election workers. For instance, in our county, someone threatened to hang one of our election workers who works for our clerk's office. And it takes that strong law enforcement entity to continue to fight that. And look, there's more than just fighting Trump that can help lift up these communities. I started a racial justice advisory council when I took office in 2020. And as part of that, helped and hosted 2 expungement fairs, which helped over hundreds of people get their criminal records clear so that they could get housing and employment, and remove barriers that are completely unfair and have an unequal disparity in populations and communities of color. So I think this isn't just about filing lawsuits and fighting Trump. We have to, as an AG, do things that also lift up those communities and protect those communities. We got to fight Trump, but we got to come to the table more with than just fighting Trump.
Mark? All the way down there. Thank you.
So I want to live in a nation, and I know everyone in this room agrees, where folks can carry out their lives free from hate and discrimination. But what we're seeing right now is a president who has very clear authoritarian ambitions and is targeting especially marginalized and vulnerable communities. In our system, the state attorney general is a key player in that resistance. I think what we're seeing really happening, the problem here is 2 things. One, we've got a president who has created a permission structure for hate, right? So that hating becomes something that seems just kind of almost normalized. Like, I can't believe every time I look at my social media feed and I see things that, like, 10 years ago, I don't think I ever would have seen. We are literally going backwards. And then the second part of the problem is we've got a president who has abandoned the work of civil rights. And as I've said a few times now, is worse than that, weaponized his DOJ against the very people he's supposed to protect. So let me talk about positively what I want to do in that space if I'm the next AG. And I want to do that by telling you a little bit about what I've already done. One of my highest priorities when I was the United States Attorney in the Western District of Michigan was civil rights. And I did 3 things. First of all, I formed a team. We did not have an established civil rights unit like they do on the eastern side of the state and have had for many years. I secured extra funding. I did some hiring and formed a solid civil rights team that was focused on this work. The second thing I do is engagement. I launched a campaign called the United Against Hate campaign. I traveled around all of my 49 counties. I met with the leaders and larger had forums, did virtual meetings with leaders of the Pride Centers, with leaders of the Muslim and Arab community, of Black communities, of the Hispanic community and others as well to help build relationships. I gave my card out freely, my cell phone, so that people knew who I was and could call me if they were experiencing problems that we could address. And the last thing I did was to prosecute cases. As I said earlier, I prosecuted multiple white supremacists that committed hate crimes across the state of Michigan, including one guy up in the Upper Peninsula who was planning a mass shooting at a house of worship in East Lansing. And we were able to fortunately prevent that from happening by intervening earlier. So in terms of what I'll do as Attorney General, I think certainly we need to push back at the federal level. You know, I'm deeply concerned about that LA case that Ellie mentioned just a couple minutes ago. I think it goes clearly against what federal law requires. I think we need to vigorously enforce state law, which does not require any agreement with federal law. And I think lastly, we need to be very vigorous in protecting voting rights. If we have a little more time, I'd love to tell you about some of the work I've done in those lines already. Thank you.
Thank you, all four of you. Sometimes you don't even know what to say, and what's happening to Black and brown people in this country. The steps backward breaks my heart, makes me furious, and I hope that everybody in this room will feel the same and do something about it. Take your votes, work hard to make, for us to take those steps back forward. So what I'm doing, we're taking cards as everybody talks, and I'm looking at the questions that we prepared, and I am incorporating some. So if you sent a card forward, your specific question may not come up, but I'm trying to incorporate those into the questions we prepared or combine them because we do have a certain amount of limited time. So the next question will focus on environmental concerns. Michigan is a beautiful state with wonderful lakes, wonderful open green spaces. And this question is going to ask you what your policies as Attorney General would be to protect the environment in Michigan, and on incorporating in that question the data centers and there, things like Enbridge Line 5 as specific examples that have been raised. So let's start with Bill. I don't think we've started with you yet, and then we'll move to Karen and then on. 2 minutes, back to 2 minutes. I'm watching that clock. Thank you.
Michigan is a truly beautiful state. It has great resources. And a big concern is water. There was a point during Governor Granholm's administration when there were attempts by the federal government to siphon off water from the Great Lakes in order to have water in the southwest of the United States. That's the kind of thing that we still have to be concerned about, because that is our lifeblood, the waters around Michigan. The second thing is we have to protect those waters from pollution. Not only do we face the issue around Enbridge Line 5 and the possibility of pollution there, but we also have to look at the dangers of PFAS. PFAS is a forever chemical. Not only have corporations wound up putting PFAS into the ground, but the federal government has done it. Every Air Force base in Michigan has put PFAS into the ground because it was used as part of a fighting foam. And so it's in the ground and it's there forever. Well, the federal government should be the one to clean it up. It's necessary. The next thing is we have to look at how we utilize the forest canopy that we have here. There was a time when logging was really popular here in Michigan, which led to the emergence of Grand Rapids as Furniture City because of the prevalence of wood. That day is gone now, but we still have to do everything we can to preserve the forest here because that is what keeps the air clear. And to the extent that we put fumes from gasoline into the air, that contributes to what's known as acid rain. and we have to protect against that. So while I haven't given you priorities, I've given you my views of what I think are important in enforcing environmental law.
Thank you. Environment, data centers, and Line 5 is a lot to cover in 2 minutes, but I'm just going to say generally this. One of the reasons that I feel compelled to run for AG is the environmental protections that you really don't have the power to address as a county prosecutor. I grew up in a really small farming community, and we had the back of my house, like we butted up against the Grand River. And I remember canoeing in the Grand River and playing in the Grand River. It is now in the lowest levels it's seen since they started documenting water levels. My philosophy is this: the entities that make the money off of things like data centers and Line 5 or any solution that is arrived on to replace Line 5 and shut it down should be bearing the proportional cost of those that data center or anything that we're talking about. I don't think we talk enough about this. Who's making money? So with the data centers, Michigan doesn't want to be left behind in that technology, and we want the jobs, but it has to be with strict environmental protection, and that is absolutely the Attorney General's job. It also should mean that they are proportionally paying for any of the outcomes on the community, on the grid, any disproportionate rise in utilities. And with regard to Line 5, it has to be shut down. And all that's happened in the last 4 to 5 years is argument, and it's still there. And we have to have the conversation about getting it shut down, but also include labor, which is the working class, and also address how we're going to usher in clean energy with everyone having a seat at the table, including the working class, including those of us who care and advocate for protecting our environment.
So we're incredibly privileged, all of us, to live in the state of Michigan. We have over 3,200 miles of shoreline, more than any state except Alaska. We've got 20% of the world's fresh water. And of course, with all of those amazing resources comes tremendous responsibility. And the pressures against our environment are bigger than ever. This is an issue I care a lot about. I've been camping and backpacking around the state of Michigan since I was little. My first outdoor adventure with my family was we went and did a 20-mile hike over 4 days up at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. I was really proud of my 4-year-old daughter with a Dora backpack. She hiked every single one of those miles all on her own. And it's just part of what's given me a real passion to try to protect what we have here in Michigan. I'll tell you, first of all, what I've done, and then let me speak to the data center issue. 2 things I'll point to. The longest standing litigation I had when I was chief legal counsel to the governor was the Line 5 litigation. It literally, the run up to it started on the day she took the oath of office. I sat across the table from Enbridge. I understand this issue very, very well. And for almost 4 years, I was closely involved in litigating it. We cannot have a pipeline going through the Great Lakes, and that's a fight that we have to continue. When I was U.S. attorney, I also had the privilege of prosecuting one of the largest, what we would call an aftermarket deletion schemes ever prosecuted in the United States. This is a scheme. These companies engage in this criminal activity where they remove the emissions equipment of vehicles, in this case, large diesel trucks. And I charged 3 corporations in the state of Michigan and their executives for doing this. These trucks were spewing toxins all across Michigan and the United States, and I hold them all criminally responsible for what they did to the environment. Data centers, we have to hold ratepayers harmless. I'm concerned right now that we don't have the clarity, transparency, and accountability we need to be able to do that. And if we have time, I'll say more about that later. Thanks.
So I have been this is the first issue that got me into activism when I was 6 years old, is environmental protection, because I got Ranger Rick magazine when I was a kid. If anybody remembers that, that's another elder millennial. And I saw pictures of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and how it was causing oil slicks, and the birds got it on them, and it made me so sad. And I started a Stop Oil Spills club for my first grade class mates. It was co-ed, by the way. There were competing no boys allowed and no girls allowed clubs, but the Stop Oil Spills club was co-ed. And this is work that I've dedicated my career to. As I said, I've practiced environmental law, and I have held corporations accountable for polluting our air and water. PFAS litigation, I've represented the states of New Jersey and Maryland and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and the teams that I've been a part of have recovered nearly $3 billion to remediate PFAS contamination. And by the way, Michigan has more identified PFAS sites than any state in the nation. This needs to be a priority of the next Attorney General, and it will be of mine. On data centers, look, I agree that we need to hold companies up to their promises. If you are saying that this is not going to increase rates on the rest of us, if you're saying that it's not going to impact our environment, you should be transparent. You should prove that, and there needs to be accountability in place, which I have not seen yet in this conversation. The last thing I'll say, because we haven't talked about this oddly in an environmental question, is we still got climate change. And we're still careening towards a cliff in terms of climate change. And the Trump administration is trying to roll back the linchpin of climate change regulation in the United States in the endangerment finding, which says that climate change does indeed endanger human health and welfare. And if that goes, which the Trump administration is attempting to do, all climate change regulation in the United States might fall. That was put into place in the first place because of activism by state AGs. State AGs need to be on the front lines of fighting against climate change for the next generation, the generation after that. And that needs to be a priority of the Michigan AG, because we're going to be so uniquely impacted with 90% of the nation's fresh water supply by climate change, and it will be a priority of mine.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you all. The next question, I was just trying to decide, I got a number of questions related to this issue, and I was trying to decide whether I should go with this question or the money in politics question first, because they are related, I think, unfortunately. So to go back to the question that I got a number of cards on. And the issue, one of the issues talked about by our Michigan Dems, and that's conditions in healthcare at the Michigan Department of Corrections, specifically for many of us at Huron Valley Women's Prison. I have at home a report from like 2006, and the conditions at MDC were appalling. Healthcare, environmental, back then, and it hasn't changed. And I would like to know, as State Attorney General, what you all might do about making sure that people in our prisons in Michigan are treated like people, like human beings, with basic needs being met, because it does impact so many communities, poor communities, communities of color, Black communities that have been historically victims of over-policing and racism. And until we, all of you had talked about social justice, until we treat all people as human beings, we're not going to get there. So I would like to know from each of you what your policies would be to improving those conditions for human beings who are incarcerated in the state of Michigan. I think it's your turn.
The Attorney General actually is the attorney for the state of Michigan, and they defend all lawsuits that any individual in MDOC files alleging their violation of their civil rights, of any conditions in the prison system. So the policy decisions that the AG makes about how to defend those suits is critical in how that might affect the way that they have access to treatment and the conditions in MDOC. Look, part of this is making sure you address it in the state level and what's happening in MDOC. But I believe the bigger part of it is, what are we going to do to keep people from going to MDOC? And what I'm doing now and what I've done in my office has addressed that. We have started and implemented under my tenure projects and programs that allow people to stay out of MDOC. We know that short periods of time for low-level nonviolent crimes of incarceration do not make us safer. So what we've done is started programs where we address, why are you here? Why are you being charged? Is it mental health services you need? Is it substance abuse issues? Do we need to provide that? We have programs where we help people get their licenses back. We have programs where we're addressing employment issues and IDs, because you can't just tell people don't get mixed up in the criminal justice system. You have to meet them where they are and help keep them out of it. We employ and work with behavioral specialists in our office to flag and address those individuals who we know are being charged and presented because of a mental health issue. We work with our racial justice committee to work on not just expungement issues, but also looking at and studying what is the racial disparity in our office. Who are we charging? What kind of sentences are they getting? I believe that prevention model, when you're talking about how to keep people out of MDOC, is just as important as addressing the conditions within MDOC.
I don't want to talk about the MDOC. I want to talk about the criminal justice system as a whole, where prosecutors have the ability to charge. And the question is, what do they charge and who do they charge? And one of the issues that I've seen is a question of overcharging, where clients that I've represented have faced multiple charges. Even the law has been changed so that for every offense, if there's a gun involved, they can be charged each time for felony firearm, which only compounds what they're facing in terms of time in prison. The criminal justice system is essentially unfair. It's biased against blacks and browns, and it's biased in favor of prosecutors, even to the point where when I go into court in Wayne County, the jury box is positioned closest to the prosecutor so that the prosecutors get the advantage of being close to the members of the jury. I'm on the other side of the room. And one of the things that I have to do before we even get into a trial is to humanize my client. And that's the issue when we get to the MDOC is this person who is in the MDOC a human being? And oftentimes the people who have been hired to act as guards at the MDOC do not see the people that they are responsible for as human. I've seen that way too many times. And it's important that people know that these are human beings. But our system is not one designed to correct behavior and to assist people in becoming better humans. It's one designed to degrade and to basically keep people in their place. I've studied the criminal justice systems of Germany, which you would expect to be particularly harsh given the history of that country. But they are far more humanitarian in what they do in their prison system, which makes a difference in terms of the recidivism rate. Now, we can talk about programs for this, programs for that, but the fact of the matter is we have to start to treat people more like human beings in the criminal justice system and once they're in the MDOC, And I will do everything in my power to make sure that that happens.
The Attorney General represents the people of the state of Michigan. And that includes the people that are sentenced to serve time for crimes that they were convicted of. Yes, it is true that the Attorney General represents the Michigan Department of Corrections. That's a client of the state Attorney General. That's how our state government is set up. But in terms of conditions inside of prisons, that gives the Attorney General some leverage, because you can advise your client as to what you should be doing to not just minimize potential liability, but to avoid violating, for example, the Eighth Amendment, which bars cruel and unusual punishment. And let's be clear about this. And people are sentenced to serve time in prison. They are not sentenced to be exposed to black mold. They are not sentenced to inhumane living conditions. They are not sentenced to be denied medical care. And that is something that the Attorney General needs to be advising its clients on. The other thing that I will say on this is, and look, I think none of us probably up here are going to take a position on potential future litigation, but there are cases in which the Attorney General in the past has set up a conflict wall within the office because, on the one hand, they have to take the side of their clients, the state of Michigan. On the other hand, the Attorney General wants to take the side of the people. This happened in the case that I mentioned briefly at the start that I worked on, the right to literacy lawsuit, where kids from Detroit alleged that their fundamental right to learn how to read had been violated. The state's position was there's no such thing as a fundamental right to learn how to read. And the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, she built a conflict wall, still represented her clients, and then as Attorney General representing the people argued that in fact there is a constitutional right to learn how to read because the Attorney General has those dual clients. That's something that we need to consider, I think, and I would consider in the appropriate cases when we're dealing with things like violations of fundamental rights, when we're dealing with things like potential cruel and unusual punishment.
So there's been a number of approaches, I think, to answering this question. I want to, I think, try to just stay really specifically focused on what was asked here. You know, I think how we treat our prisoners is, in a sense, a window into the soul of our nation, into our state, who we are as a people. Prisoners are obviously incredibly vulnerable by the mere fact that they are prisoners, and that creates obligations on us as a society. So, you know, I think this issue is extremely important, and it's one where the Attorney General potentially has a very significant role to play. There's certainly multiple legal provisions. You just heard Ellie mention the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. There's potentially 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause issues. There's other state law provisions. And so what I would do here is what I would do, I think, in other areas as well, is one, gather evidence, right? It's always the job and the prosecutor working with others to understand what the facts are and what's happening on the ground. And then do what I would do with all cases, which is to move forward without fear or favor, with independence and impartiality, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. You know, as a government lawyer, sometimes you're in the position of being on a side you don't want to be. And I'll give you an example. When I was a legal counsel at Governor, there was an ongoing case from the Schneider administration, a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of women prisoners who had their civil rights violated in many, many ways, including sexual assault. And there was a major lawsuit against the state for structural problems that helped contributed to that. I wasn't excited about being on the side of that case that I was on, but what I did was try to use that position, and I think I did, to reach a just solution that put in place strong structural reforms and also gave compensation to the victims. It was a $100 million settlement that we finally reached, working with the other side. And again, I don't always like being on that side of the V in a case, but you can do a lot of good things on that side. And whether it's in that role as Attorney General or whether it's putting up a conflict wall and bringing the case myself, it's an important role and one I'm ready and willing to play.
Thank you for your answers. The next question is related to money in politics. And it kind of relates, I think, to the last question. Like I said, I have a study going back to 2006 where the conditions in MDOC very similar. And the question is, then one has to ask, why hasn't it changed? Racism plays a part, but I also think money does. So I would like this question to be about money in politics and government. So I would like you to address how you might help get it out. I also want to know if any of you are taking money from PACs, because that is one of the issues. How do you stand up to donors if you are taking money from big money donors? So you can handle this one answer, whether you take money from PACs, but also talk a little bit about how you would address your policies as Attorney General, address the issue of money in politics and the potential corruption. So I think, Bill, that you're next. You started off this time. Thank you.
Well, Lord Acton once said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Since the Citizens United case, it's now a matter of absolute money corrupts politics absolutely. Because not only can people give as much money as they want, we oftentimes don't know the source of that money. And we've seen that in many instances. And that leads to corruption. Now, I talked about being Associate Independent Counsel where we prosecuted the Secretary of Agriculture for corruption. And in essence, all he took was probably about $100,000 worth of gifts from corporations and others. He was a piker compared to the current president. 100,000. That wouldn't even buy Trump's lunch. So what we're looking at is how do we get money out of politics? And one of the things that there was a movement back in the 70s to actually have citizens fund political activity. That's kind of died on the vine, as it were. And so now people are putting money into politics through PACs. Well, who's part of the PAC? We don't know. That's probably why it's called a PAC, because it's a pack of wolves that are feeding on the political system. Do I take money from PACs? No. At this point in my campaign, I haven't asked anybody for money, in part because I know there are people who would contribute to me, but I don't want to do that just yet. If it's time to compete against the Republicans, I certainly will ask people for money because it's important. But you don't want to be beholden to anybody. If you're going to be the AG of this state, you want to be independent enough to act for the people of the state and their concerns. You don't want to be beholden to somebody. The hardest thing is when you've taken money from somebody and they come back and say, hey, can you do me a favor? Well, you may not want to, but there's this little tug that, well, maybe I should. There's also the question of, even if you don't do that person a favor, how will the public look at it? Will they think that you did? So I'd like to minimize the amount of money that's into politics so that we can actually have a viable political campaign that's based on what your ideas are. Who's next?
Okay. We've got to start by practicing what we preach. And I have never taken a corporate PAC check. I didn't take corporate PAC money in my race for prosecutor in 2020, in my reelect in 2024. I'm not taking it now, and I will never touch a corporate PAC check. And let me tell you why this is so important, particularly for the state AG. We've got to get money out of politics generally. And corporations give money to legislators because it provides them influence. Let's not make any mistake about it. They're not writing checks just out of the goodness of their heart or because they like a person. They expect a return on investment. But for the AG, as we've talked so much about here, who's charged with going after corporations who are engaging in wage theft, who are screwing over consumers, who are contaminating our environment, you should never be able to buy favor with an attorney general. And this is true not just of Republicans, but of Democrats, too. We can't pretend like we're above this. We have seen in other states, attorneys general drop consumer protection investigations, for example, 10 minutes after being approached by a lobbyist from that corporation that was a target of an investigation. We cannot have that. That's why I've drawn a clear line in the sand. And by the way, I'll also say this applies to executives, to lobbyists. I'm proud to have taken the League of Conservation Voters money pledge, which says not just no corporate money from the utilities, but nothing from their executives, nothing from their lobbyists. And that's something that is really important given the role that the AG plays with respect to utilities in general. I will say this too. We need to overturn Citizens United. It has been a horrific decision. Money in politics is corrupting. I look at the moms here, right, who've been fighting against the NRA for decades and decades and decades, and that's because of money in politics too. As AG, I will take every opportunity that I have to chip away at Citizens United and hopefully to get that overturned when the opportunity arises. In the interim, I do encourage everybody to sign the Mop Up Michigan ballot initiative, which is geared towards getting money out of politics. It could not be more timely because every politician needs to ultimately abide by these strictures.
So if there's any position in state government where we should have confidence that the elected official is working our interests and not those of corporations, it's the Attorney General. That's why I've taken a pledge that I will never take a corporate PAC. And I've gone further than that, especially in the area of utilities. And I want to say a little bit about that. I've taken a pledge, as Ellie just said as well, that I'll never take a dime from a corporate utility PAC, from their executives, or from their lobbyists as well. Why is utilities such a big issue? It's a big issue because we have the highest electricity rates in the Midwest. We have the most unreliable service in the nation, and DTE and consumers every single year continue to give between 9 and 11% return to their investors. And this, DTE and consumers have a stranglehold on politics in Michigan. I want to be very clear about that. And let me say something a little uncomfortable. It's not just Republicans. It's some Democrats too. In fact, not everybody standing before you right here has been willing to take the LCV challenge because they're taking money from utility executives. I will never, ever do that. And here's why that matters, because the AG has special authority to stand up and intervene when those monopolies seek to raise your utility rates. And so you have to have confidence that that AG candidate is going to stand up and fight for you. And that's why I've taken that pledge, and that will be my commitment here forward. Thanks.
Thank you all again. Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, Mark. I think you know who he's talking about. I've raised over $1 million, and not one penny is from a corporate PAC check. $2,500 came from people who worked at utility companies. Of the two women who gave that money to me, one has been my college friend for 25 years and has been supporting me as a judge, as a prosecutor, and my stance in Oxford. And the second person supported me, who I had never met, only because of the position and the stance I've taken on Oxford. When I took office in 2020 as the prosecutor, I got hundreds of thousands of dollars from defense attorneys. You know why? Because they wanted criminal justice reform. Did they get anything from that? Do they call me? Do I give them favors? Absolutely not. You know what they get? They get a fair and just prosecutor. $1 million. I didn't ask a bunch of rich people because I don't know a bunch of rich people. I didn't grow up with college-educated parents. I grew up in the working class. I got money, over 1,000 different donors. $10 from Shannon Light and Hastings, $5 from Marianne from Oak Park, $25 from Philip in Jackson, all over. And I am proud of that. And if anyone on this panel wants to challenge my ethics, again, do your homework, because I have been in public service for over 15 years. And not once have I ever, nor will I ever, make a decision or take a stance, big stances that you need courage to take, like the stance I took in Oxford, which I thought would cost me my future political career. I did it anyway. I don't care about the money. I don't care about how powerful you are. I am always going to do the right thing.
Thank you, everyone. Just as a quick addition, we deliberately made questions not directed at anybody. So just for that clarity, we are getting close to the end, but so I've been going through the questions we got, and we're not going to be able to get them all, even the general topics. But one I think is particularly important, and that is the prosecutors are protectors of the people of the state of Michigan. And one of the groups in our state that is particularly vulnerable is our children. Our children are not okay. And that is particularly true, again, of if you are a Black child, a brown child, if you live in our under-resourced communities, you're not okay. And part of that is our kids in Michigan are not learning to read. This group has had panels on literacy before, talking about the literacy crisis. And so all the challenges that we will face as a state are really going to be made worse if our kids can't read. The policies of the Trump administration are not pro-child, and he's eliminating the Department of Education. So my question for you is how you will protect our children, and specifically related to literacy, and how we can address that crisis of kids who are not learning to read, because if you don't learn to read, your future is in the jail, prisons, or worse. And that is a sad, heartbreaking reality. So how would you address the literacy crisis? I'm not sure who starts. I
think I went last, so I'm first this time.
Okay.
Look, part of why I'm here is because I only got here through the public education system and through loans and grants in undergraduate and law school. And those are absolutely the things that the Trump administration is trying to threaten. I'll tell you what, how we're not going to solve the literacy problem is blaming the teachers, because we like to blame the teachers for everything. We need support and resources in public education. We need to fight against, with every single tool we have, the effort to privatize our education system and limit the amount of taxpayer dollars that we pay into and not be allowed, which is what Trump tried to do. Literacy is absolutely a question of public education. I've fought my whole life to protect kids and families. I started out as a teacher. I then became a prosecutor and prosecuted child sexual assault cases. Then I practiced in private practice in the family law area. And as a judge, I presided over the abuse and neglect docket. And something we don't talk about enough is how at risk a child is with removal. Even just one day in the foster care system makes them 10 times more likely they're going to end up in prison, 10 times more likely they're going to be homeless, they're going to suffer from a major mental health crisis. Those kids are at risk. They are the very children that we have to protect. They are the kids that always fall behind in literacy. So it's fighting and protecting our public education system, fighting and protecting our teachers unions, who are the people on the front lines trying to do that work, and also investing in those kids that we know are at risk, which are in our foster care system, and trying to keep and do our best and keep families together.
One of the big issues is, are we going to have a public education system or not? Over the last decade, perhaps 2 decades, so much more of the resources of the state have been diverted to private schools and diverted to charter schools. Now, it's unfair to blame that on the Trump administration or Republicans, because everybody's had a hand in it. Although Betsy DeVos has probably had a bigger hand than anybody else. She might have put her foot in it too. But the point is we need to understand, how do we educate people? How can we get them the education they need? And there's another point. If you don't see a possibility for you and your community in terms of work, why bother? Many of the clients I represent have perhaps a 9th or a 10th grade education. They saw no point in continuing through high school to the end because there was no job for them. Those are the people that typically wind up in the criminal justice system, particularly in the city of Detroit, in particular in Wayne County. So what do they wind up doing? In Wayne County, in the outer suburbs, it's typically they turn to making meth and distributing meth or fentanyl. In the city of Detroit, it's typically they are going to rob somebody or shoot somebody. If we can't give people hope, they will do things that they need to do in order to get by. Now, the Child Protective Services, they need to get better about what they're doing. There have been cases that I've been involved in where, had Child Protective Services intervened at the appropriate moment, that child might not have had bad things happen to them. It's important that we hold them to account. But more than anything else, teaching kids to read, absolutely. But we've got to have something for them to get if they do read and read successfully. So we're going to have to change the system in a sense. And I'm going to do everything I can as Attorney General to make that change. Oh, by the way, the Attorney General has the ability to propose legislation.
I started my career as an 8th grade public school teacher. I taught special education and general education, U.S. history classes. And this issue is something that I've spent my career fighting for. There's no substitute for funding and supporting our public schools and our teachers and the families that are going into those schools. I'll mention a couple of things right now that we've talked a lot about, federal actions that we need to fight back against. The attempts to prevent teachers from teaching real history is something that's causing teachers to leave the profession because they don't know what they can say in their classroom, and that is going to exacerbate the literacy crisis. The attempts to dismantle the Department of Education is going to mean that special education students are not getting the resources that they need. That's what the Department of Education does, folks. It's special education, civil rights, as well as student loans. So we got to fight back against that. But here's the other thing. I believe, and I have litigated this, that literacy is a fundamental constitutional right. Like I said at the start, I was proud to lead the city of Detroit's efforts in the right to literacy suit, which was filed in federal court and which ended up netting nearly $100 million for the Detroit public school system. I still get updates about the kids in that case, the plaintiffs in that case, and how they're doing, how the money's being spent. It's not nearly enough to dig our way out of the Betsy DeVos-inspired policies that have decimated our schools, but it's a start. My position on that is not going to change when I become AG. Literacy is a fundamental right. It is a constitutionally protected right. I deeply, deeply believe that. And I will fight for that, whether it is in federal court, which I'll be honest is not, because we've got a bad U.S. Supreme Court right now, is probably not the way to go. or more plausibly under our state constitution. Because our state constitution can provide rights over and above what the federal constitution provides for. We've fought hard to get a 6-1 Democratic majority on the Michigan Supreme Court right now. It's time to use it. It's time to use it creatively. And there is no more important way to do so than ensuring that every kid in Michigan has the right to an excellent education. And that is something I will always fight for.
So education is an incredibly important priority and reflects in many ways, I think, what this nation is all about. You know, you maybe heard that debate, J.D. Vance saying that like America is a country about blood and soil. It's not about an idea. I couldn't more strongly disagree. Like what makes the United States of America unique is that we are a country who is committed to the equality of all persons. And the most important way that we keep faith with that promise is through education, and especially our commitment to public education. I've been pleased to be able to be in a few key positions to help defend that. One of the ways I did that was when I was the chief legal counsel for the governor. I would kind of watch what cases were coming in against the state, and some of them I would pull back and carefully manage from my office because they were just so important. And one of them was we had a conservative group that was attacking an amendment in our state constitution, which was sometimes referred to as a Blaine Amendment, which is just simply a provision that says that public dollars have to be used for public education. They cannot be diverted to be used for private education. And there was a group that was just assaulting that and trying to argue that that violated the federal constitution. And we were able to successfully defeat that assault. You know, it was a little uncomfortable again, in the kind of reasons I was explaining earlier, to sit on the other side from Ellie from that right to read case. But that was an important role as well. Like, I didn't really want to be on that side of it, but yet we also had the ability to reach an agreement, right? And to reach an agreement that was good for the students in the city of Detroit that amounted to, as Ellie said, almost $100 million. I was proud to be part of that effort and to bring that case to a close with the kind of lasting legacy that it created. I think now is an incredibly important moment for state AGs looking forward, protecting the civil rights of teachers, protecting the assault on what students are allowed to read, what teachers are allowed to teach, ensuring that we have strong resources going into our school. You know, I saw growing up, every year my mom would spend money out of our personal money to help supplement for school supplies because she didn't have enough. And I think being an advocate for public education in that way is critical as well.
So thank you for your comments on this really important issue. We are closing now. We are a little bit over time. Instead of giving a closing statement, I'm going to ask each of you in one sentence or less to say what is the achievement that you are most proud of. And we're going to let Karen go first because she's got a hard stop to get out of here, which she told me about in advance. And
Thank you.
agreed to help.
I appreciate it.
One sentence.
I am most proud of being a mother who has set a good example for my children, that you can do the right thing and serve your community with courage and integrity and still be a really good parent.
Thank you.
This may be a lengthy sentence.
Short
The
sentence.
achievement I'm most proud of is having represented a young man who was accused of criminal sexual conduct in the first degree with his girlfriend's children. He insisted that he didn't do it. And for 2 years, he was held in jail pending his trial. At trial, we were able to prove that it was all a lie fabricated by this woman's ex-boyfriend so that he could step back into her life. And my client, after a 2.5-week trial, was found not guilty on all charges.
Thank you, Bill.
Let me semicolon for we left. it's hard to say one proudest achievement when you're in the legal system, and that is because every case that you touch when you are part of the legal system, certainly when you're in a position like prosecutor, that is something that for the people that is involved in it is the most important thing that is going to be happening in their life, whether it's a big or a small case, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, whether it's a major case like suing the opioid industry, or a minor case like I had as a private lawyer representing an individual who was an immigrant from El Salvador and had been taken advantage of by a predatory debt negotiation company, and was able to keep him in his home by recovering money from that predatory company.
Thank you, Ellie.
Every case is important.
Thank you, Ellie.
Exclamation point. That was a
Kathy's quite an enforcer here. So
Um,
I'm just going to point to what I said in my introduction. I was really proud to lead the governor's legal fight to protect reproductive freedom, because I think it's a good example of what I like to do as a lawyer. Not just reacting, but proactively looking ahead, seeing what's coming, and taking steps to protect Michiganders. And it's what I want to do as AG as well. Thank you all so much for the forum.
Thank you. Thank you to the candidates. Thank you to Kathy Wyatt for a fantastic job of moderating.